Yeah, thanks for having me. Um, Mike, Rob, thanks for inviting me to speak. Xander, thanks for coordinating. So this is by far the most personal talk I've ever given, and it feels fitting to me that I'm doing it here at MicroConf among hundreds of people who I respect, many of whom I've come to know, and many of whom I admire. So thanks for kind of coming along on this journey, both with Mike and I through the years of MicroConf, and with me through the podcast, and from beach towels to a life-changing exit. We haven't had as much of it this year, but it's been a little bit of a MicroConf tradition to talk about why we do the things we do. And a couple years ago, Patrick McKenzie said, all the rest of this, I'm going to give you some tactics or something to think about, but all of this is dust compared to this. So this is my wife, who you'll be hearing from tomorrow from this stage, as well as our two boys going to see the Nutcracker in San Francisco. All right, so this talk, it's broken up into 5 parts, and it's going to be about 40 minutes, maybe 45 if I tell some extra stories. And the whole point of this, there's a couple things I want you to take away from. One, it's a long journey. I think most of us know that already. Another one is probably the most popular question, or the most common question I get about selling drip was, what made you decide to do it? What was your thought process? What did you go through? And I'm going to dive really deep into that here in a way that I've already talked about it on the podcast and other places, but if you've heard that, you're still going to hear more about it. And then the third thing I'm going to talk about is go really in depth as much as I can, given that there's an NDA. I'm going to go in depth to what it looked like from the inside and what it really felt like, including like graphs and charts showing how often we spoke over these months. It's just a pretty fascinating process. And I should make a note here that this was my thought process. Derek and I, along with our spouses, frankly, we kind of made this decision together. And so this is just from my perspective of my motivations, and realizing at a certain point that I had started building products for a certain reason, and I had gone off the rails at one point, and thinking about how can I get back, how can I get off this crazy train? Boom, you like that? That was right off the cuff. I didn't even know. All right, so we're going to start with part 1. We'll walk through some different years, different phases, and then I'm going to dig really, really deep into it in terms of the acquisition and what that actually looked like. So part 1, this is 2005 to 2009. I was transitioning there was some salaried work in here, but there's a lot of consulting, okay? And consulting for me was very life-sucking. I just despised it. Didn't like working for other people. Didn't like the lack of freedom. Made really good money for how old I was, 150K, 180K some years. But I really wanted to get into products. I felt like that was the golden ticket. And so during these years, I either acquired or launched products like .NET Invoice, Wedding Toolbox, just a random assortment, apprentice lineman jobs, which is a job board for electricians, and then Just Beach Towels, which is the beach towel reference in the title. And Just Beach Towels was an e-commerce website, and it did a couple grand. It did $0 when I acquired it, and then I learned how to market reasonably well, and it did a couple grand by the time I sold it later on, realizing I don't want to be in physical products, right? This was a big realization, but then I took that knowledge, parlayed it up into my other products. DIY Duck Boat is an interesting one. It was a duck boat plans that you could build. So there was a whole instruction list and a shopping list. So you could go to Home Depot, and why is that so funny? My wife gives me so much shit about this one. And I'm like, so I bought it from a guy who built duck boats. He had testimonials, he had the whole thing, and he's just like, I don't know how to sell this. And it was doing $50 a month, and I bought it from him for a couple hundred, and then I did SEO on it. This is 2007 maybe, and it was doing $500 a month later. And I was like, this is a car payment, dude. Don't mock me for the DIY, the duck boat. You love duck boats. You love to mock me about duck boats. And then CMS Themer, which was really a productized service before we called things those. So this collaboration, this collection, the portfolio, if you will, of products was on the low end, DIY Duck Boat did $500 a month, and on the high end, best month, .NET Invoice did $5 grand. And so combine that all together, I was running all these, it was just me, I was a coder, I was doing SEO, I was doing some AdWords, and I had a couple VAs that were helping me out. And I made less doing this than I did consulting, but I was way happier. So give or take on any given year, maybe 110 to 130 in terms of that. But I had so much freedom, right? And the whole point of me getting into products, why I did that, why would I take a pay cut to go do something else? I was asked that by my friends whose souls were slowly being sucked out of them by their job. And I said, over time, I realized that there were 3 reasons that I had to do products, that I needed to own my destiny, I guess is the way I said it. The first is freedom, second is purpose, and the third is relationships. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these. Now, I didn't come up with this. I actually heard it on a podcast years ago, and then I brought it up to Sherry one time, and she said, that's my wife, and she said, this is there's psychology, there's research around this, like this isn't some unique thing I've come up with, but I've come to own this, like, when I don't have all 3 of these things, I'm not happy. And I slowly kind of go off the rails, and I would actually say that most people in this room, since you are entrepreneurial, if you're here, you probably need these 3 things as well. And any one of them, if you remove it, you're gonna be unhappy eventually. That's my hypothesis today. So, freedom, what does that mean? I think for most people in this room, it means It means the ability to choose what you work on, right? You want to work on interesting things. You don't want clients dictating something. You don't want a boss dictating. And the other thing is to be in control of your time, your income, and your mobility. Tim Conley, nod to you. But it's to be in control of can I take a week off? Can I take a month off? Can I work 3 hours a day? Can I work when I want to increase, decrease your income, and to be able to perhaps travel the world if you want, or not. These 3 things are very hard with traditional jobs. They're actually hard with traditional consulting. Even when I was a consultant, I didn't have these. So this was the freedom that I sought, and I think it's the freedom that a lot of us in this room seek as founders or folks who are aspiring to do this. And then the last one is that I learned later. I didn't realize this up front, but not having your life consumed by your business. Because if you're thinking about your business all the time, even if you're traveling the world and doing things that are fun, you don't have the freedom that you won't have the freedom that you want. The next part was purpose. Remember, freedom, purpose, and relationships. So purpose, I think, is personal. I think each of us needs to find our own purpose and find what ignites you. For me, I have learned over time that it is 2 things, and I could probably do a whole talk just on these 2 things. But for me, it's learning new things. I've found that I took the StrengthsFinder test, and I'm a learner, or I think it's a learner. And when I stop learning, I shrivel, metaphorically. And then when I stopped teaching, and teaching is, this is why I do 2 podcasts every week. This is why I've written a couple books. This is why I have the blog. This is why we do MicroConf. This is why I do talks. I've made exponentially more money from software products, but over the years, right, than the actual teaching and selling of stuff and MicroConf tickets or whatever. But if I don't have those things, then I'm not happy. Just doing software doesn't allow me to learn and teach enough. So I found this. For you, you're going to have to figure out what your own personal purpose is. So this talk's probably not going to do that for you. The third thing is relationships, and this is the one that I think most of us as maybe technically oriented people forget, or I think it's forget. And I forget this for 6 months at a time and suddenly realize, oh yeah, I really have kind of fucked this up. My wife is pissed off at me, or I haven't been with my kids as much as I should have been. This is the one, or your friends, this is the one that I think that we overlook for work and for even as bootstrappers, when we have more control of our time, I think we tend to focus it on driving revenue forward or whatever, and relationships tends to be naturally the last thing on a lot of our minds. I think relationships is as important. I think this applies to everyone. I don't think you find your own kind of relationship equilibrium. I think relationships having this kind of value, or the freedom of relationships, means 2 things. One is being able to choose whom you interact with. I worked at a bunch of jobs where I was either managing people who I didn't pick, I was managed by people who I didn't like, or I had coworkers who weren't as motivated, weren't as good, weren't as whatever. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced this. And so the ability to perhaps, as a founder, build a team that you like, and you're like, man, there's 10 people on my team, and I would hang out with all of them. I really enjoy working with them. The ability to have that control is, I think, amazing. And I think that's one of the reasons I became a founder, and I would guess a lot of folks in this room as well. The other part of relationships is having time and headspace. So it's not just time, but it's the headspace that your business is not sucking the life out of you, or when you're with your kids, you're thinking, oh man, is the is the database going to grind up tonight? Or, oh boy, we got a text that the queue is down, or the whatever, or the marketing thing, someone's beating us to the punch, right? So it's time and headspace to be with the people that matter to you. So this is why I got into products, and I would actually guess that it's why almost even if you've never realized this, I think it's why most of us get into products. So products allowed me to quit consulting. And this was awesome, right? And it was like a dream come true. And again, I was making less money, but the days were just magical, honestly. For like the first couple years, I just pinched myself all the time thinking, so I don't have a boss anymore, and I can just kind of hang around and do stuff? And so I achieved freedom in 2008. 2008, 2009, right as I stopped consulting, I achieved this. I achieved freedom. I achieved the purpose, which was driving my business forward and hanging out with my family. And I had amazing relationships, and I really enjoyed it. So this was a win. But there's a lot of buts in this talk. I go down a road, and then I realize, no, not like that. Not buts like that. I heard you chuckle. So I go down a lot of roads, and then I realize this isn't actually, it either isn't what I wanted, or there's kind of something that comes out of left field and knocks me on my butt. Sorry, that's as good as it gets with me. So this is why I have intermissions, remember, with the videos and stuff? Okay, so what happened is, this would happen to a number of my products, but .NET invoice revenue in 2008, actual revenue numbers, dun, dun, yeah, you can read that. All right, so we start in May of 2008, and it goes to March of the following year. It's a one-time sale product, right? It's not a SaaS app. So we see 1,500, 1,500, 1,500, swings way up to $5,000 because I did some big deal with a web host, and then you can see October, it drops down and it bottoms out around 500, and then it swings back up. And this was around the financial crisis, but this was a little extreme, but it was also not totally uncommon. And so I had 5, 6 products at any given time, and they were doing this. And for me, I suddenly had freedom, purpose, and relationships, but I was stressed the hell out all the time because I'm thinking, am I gonna do this for 5 years, or am I gonna go back to consulting, which I couldn't imagine, fate worse than death, or am I gonna go back to salaried employment, which is even a fate worse than death, and I just couldn't imagine. Like, I need something that's gonna last here. I'm a very long-term thinker, and so I added one more item to my list. So we have this freedom you've heard about. We have this purpose of learning and teaching. We have the relationships, obviously, and I added this one, stability. Okay, it's the stability or the longevity, maybe a better way to put it, is like something that's gonna last and I don't have to worry about every day. And I don't have to think about every week of, am I gonna have to, sell the kids to pay the mortgage or something? And so I started with how do I achieve this? That's the big question. So I think of products that I've just shown, all these one-time sale products and such, as being kind of stability 1.0, and realizing that was not going to cut it. So I was thinking, like, how do I get stability? Keep in mind, this is 2009. And in fact, in 2010, like the cool part of the story is we had our second son, and I took about 8 or 9 months where I worked 8 to 12 hours a week, just because I had these products that were really mostly in autopilot, and they got organic traffic and such. And now that is time. I will never in my life regret the months that I spent with him. You practice to talk and you don't do this, and then you get in front of people. I will never in my life regret the time that I spent with him. Later on, there is time that I will regret, and I'll loop that back. But not spending with him, all right. So this was my dream come true from the time I was 20-something years old, was to be able to have products and be in control of this and have the freedom. But realizing that it could be taken away at any time was frightening to me as someone who wants this stability, right, or wants long-term longevity. And so I realized that what I really needed was, instead of these stupid one-time sales, and again, this is 2009, 2010, I wanted recurring revenue. Okay, so we all know this now, but give me a break. It was 7 years ago. SaaS didn't even exist. It did, but we didn't call it that yet. So recurring revenue was absolutely, I thought, the golden ticket. It was the Holy Grail, and indeed, it was the best thing since sliced bread. And it turns out it was. In 2011, when I went back to work, because I did eventually get bored, I love being with the kid, but eventually you got to do your next thing, right? You got to learn and teach. So in 2011, I went after Stability 2.0. And this is where I said, I need to build or I need to buy a SaaS app. And I basically took the revenue. So the way I acquired and built all those other apps that I showed you earlier, .NET Invoice, is I had enough money in a bank account from consulting. I had $15,000 that I'd saved up over a year, and I bought .NET Invoice for 11 grand. And then I took that revenue, I grew the business, and then I had another 10 grand, and I bought the next one. And then I had 5 grand, and I bought this. So that was it. There was no trust fund. I came from a working class family. My dad was an electrician. This was just me working and saving money and doing it. Same thing with Hittail. So that was the SaaS app I acquired in 2011. And I have an in-depth talk. In fact, it's one of my favorite talks I've ever given. It was 3 or 4 years ago at MicroConf, and it's called How to 10x in 15 Months. And it's like 51 minutes of just talking about taking it from whatever $1,500 a month in revenue and growing it up. And I go month by month. It's just I've watched it recently and just been like, man, you nailed it on that one. And I tend to be my worst critic, so I don't pat myself on the back very much. So the story was I buy this SaaS app that's doing 20 grand annual revenue, right? So right around 1,500. Paid the 30 grand for it. And again, I didn't have a trust fund for the 30 grand. The 30 grand was revenue from .NET Invoice and beach towels. And I'm just building and building and building. And of course, the night I wired the 30 grand, I told Sherry, what the fuck have I done? Like, I've never had that much money in my life, and I just sent it to someone, and I bought this piece of shit app. And she said, but this is what you do. This is what you do. This is who you are. If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? And I didn't have an answer. So I worked over the next 18 months with a couple contractors, mostly on my own, and got it up to a 300K run rate, which was a life-changing moment for me. Because you think I'm kind of cruising, living in Central Valley of California with my family, which was great. And again, from those products, I was making 110, 120K, which is a great living. We could afford a house and such. And then this was a game changer because this, SaaS, especially when you don't have a lot of, I didn't need a lot of developers because I was just kind of coding it myself. 80% margins, right? Maybe more, net margins. So I was just making more money than I had ever seen, and we banked a lot of it, and we used it to travel a little more. But it was again that next step of the dream. It was going from kind of making a living to then, wow, holy crap, I've made it. Like I remember I was like, I think I've made it. This is it. I'm done. I'm gonna retire. It's 65. I'm doing this forever. But there were some things that kept happening. So about every 6 months, Google would do that. And not intentionally, but Google has a way, just like a lot of big companies do, of accidentally just breaking all your shit if you rely on them. So they had not provided. Remember when they used to give keywords? That's what Hittail used. And so then they went not provided, and Hittail was decimated. So I was freaking out thinking, I've sold most of those other apps. My whole income, my whole livelihood is based on this app. And if it goes under, what am I gonna go back to consulting, salary? I'm too far along in this to take that step back. And I probably wouldn't have had to consult for long, but it was scary to me. I didn't have the stability that I wanted. And Google did this about every 6 months. They then I was scraping something, and then they broke that, and then Google Webmaster Tools, and then they broke that, and they just kept doing it. And it always happened when I was at MicroConf, about to go on stage, and then I'd be 600 errors because you can't import anything. And it's like, oh my gosh, and I'm the only guy that developed on it. So we were in Europe, and then it happened, and it was always like, I don't want to do this until am I going to do this when I'm 50 or 65? Is this app actually going to be a decade or 2 decade-long app? Can I bet my future on it? Because if not, I need to find, so I didn't have stability. That's the whole point. But if not, I need to find stability 3.0, right? I realized there was something else that I needed to do to feel, for me, like I had something that was going to last a decade or maybe even longer, assuming I lived that long. Boom, I have life insurance, don't worry. So, all right. Stability 3.0, I realized, was not being reliant on a single external data source, right? So not being like a Twitter client or needing all of Google stuff in order to function. And so this was a big one for me. There were 2 other things that I didn't love about Hittail. One was the price point was pretty low, and so churn was pretty high, and it wasn't a core business application. So it was just something that was it's doing well. I sold it about, 15, 16 months ago, and the new owners love it, but I didn't think it was, in my long-term interest to keep doing it. So part 2 is the next step after Hittail, okay? And that was, of course, Drip. Derek, who you heard from earlier, he broke ground on code in late 2012, and we launched in 2013. I've talked extensively about the Drip and the process of growing it, finding product market fit and stuff. I'm not going to rehash that here. Suffice to say, for those who haven't heard it, or even just to refresh your memory, 2013 was really the year we launched it. 2014 was the year we found product market fit. All of this is actual revenue. This is online. I've published this in previous talks. But that was the launch, right? So you see the $7,500 was in December of 2013. Yeah, 2013. And then it took us about 7 months to really find product market fit. You can see it dip down, and we just built part of MailChimp, and nobody wanted it. And then we eventually, by the time we added automation in July of 2014, that's where the 10.8 happens. And we had completely stopped marketing between then, and yet, all the numbers went in the right direction. So that was an amazingly fun adventure. And by fun, I mean it totally sucked, because I'll get to that later. And this is the starting to scale, which is the same. It's just an extension of the graph, right? So you see the 7501 there, and then eventually I can't read it. It's in mid 2015. Yeah, we got up to 45K. So this was the last time I really talked about Hittail revenue, and there's a reason for that, because we started getting inbound acquisition interest, and it just didn't make sense to keep doing it. We also had a bunch of competitors, some of who were stealing our ideas and claiming they were their own. So that didn't quite fly. So I started being a little more tight-lipped about it. All that to say, this looks amazing, right? This is the next dream. This is the dream of every SaaS founder, is to have this amazing growth curve. And yet, this was what Drip net profit looked like, and from June 2013 to March 2015. I'm not going to put a scale on the left. Suffice to say, that red line is 0, so it's all negative. And that is each month, so that's not a cumulative. Each month was negative. And it was negative by thousands or tens of thousands. That's all I will say. I was not dropping 6 figures a month. All of this was subsumed. The reason I had this money was I was just taking all the profit out of Hittail. So taking Hittail profit, as Hittail starts to go down, because I'm not working on it anymore. Derek and I are working on Drip, and I'm just bailing money out of one into another. So you can see where this is going. So we finally, we break even just on 1 month. We break even, so it doesn't pay it back, but at least we broke even by, it looks like, March of 2015. Now, what this meant was, in 2014, I had the hardest year of my entrepreneurial career by far, and it was especially the latter half. I had, at the time, again, the most money I had ever seen in my life in a bank account, and it was all basically Hittail revenue and some Drip, and it was $150,000, and I could not believe there was that much money in an account. I did not grow up with that much money, and I was dumping it all, not dumping, but I was pushing it all into Drip. We hired a head of revenue to try to move faster, because it's just such a competitive space, right, to be in marketing automation. And within 60 days, I had a $60,000 or $70,000 tax bill. Some expenses came due that I didn't expect. I forget what the other thing was, but suffice to say, I wrote $120,000 in checks out of that account. Poof. So now I have $30,000 in a bank account that I used to have $150,000, and I essentially had enough money to make payroll for 45 days. And it was myself, it was Derek, and it was 2 engineers that we had just hired. We were 3 months past hiring them. And I realized it was my fault. I made a shitty cash management decision. I messed it up, there's no doubt. But it took 6 or 7 months to recover, because I had no other outs, right? I don't have a parent who I could borrow money from. I actually could really consider borrowing from a 401k, which is very much against who I am. I was trying to figure out if I could borrow against credit cards. I mean, it was just stupid. You just get to a point where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Am I going to lay somebody off that my whole community knows? We had this little tight tech community, and it's like, I don't know, man. So, hopefully my mistake can be just a warning to everyone else. But this was the year that I regretted. I talked to you about that I will never regret the time that I spent with my son. This is the 6 months that I deeply regret, because I realized I really didn't have freedom anymore. I had a purpose, that was cool, but I was certainly fucking up my relationships. And around this time, this is when I told my wife, I said, this is it. I can't do this again. Like, I'm not going to start another one from scratch. I'm assuming we're going to make it out of it. I'm going to figure it out, but I'm done after this. Like, whatever, I don't know what after this means. Maybe I run it till I'm dead and then I really am done. Or maybe I, whatever. Maybe Derek eventually buys me out, or maybe we just have so much cash we hire a CEO, or maybe we get acquired, or maybe whatever it is, I'm not doing another one of these. And my wife, she's very tactful, right? She's a psychologist, has a way with words and kind of can ease you into things and help you try to see what the deeper meaning in what you're saying. She said, yeah, that's bullshit. Because this is what you do. I don't think it's bullshit. That's unsettled. She still thinks it is. I don't think I'm going to do another one. Okay, so been a little heavy, and I don't like talking straight for 40 minutes. So I have a couple. This is a really quick intermission based on normally what I have. So first lesson is don't leave your phone unlocked with your kids in the house. Okay, so I picked up my phone, and all right, there it is. So. Yeah, and then there were videos, and there were like 400 of these on my phone, and I'm sitting there like delete, and then finally someone showed me that you can bulk delete. So thank you, Anna. So, and then here's the other one. Do we have volume on video? All right. So this is a short one, but a little joke, and I think maybe this kid takes after me. Listen to this joke here.
You're in a concrete room with a saw and a table. What do?
I don't know. What do I do?
The answer is, you saw the table in half, 2 halves make a hole, climb out the hole.
That's it, sorry. Poor kid. He has me as a humor role model. Can you imagine? Yeah, exactly. So anyways, it gets better. Hopefully he'll learn from his mom in long term. Okay, so we did make it past 2014. I did not, I did not completely spontaneously combust. Even though I felt like I was going to. So we make it to 2015, and now the profit's starting to come in, right? And so I'm like, all right, we crossed over that barrier, SaaS, we're growing fast. We're growing faster than, the curve I showed you. Like, we started accelerating past there. We introduced workflows. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's, no, that was until 2016, sorry. But automation really picked up, and we were really starting to take a lot of our competitors' customers. And so, drip net profit, and again, there's don't be a scale on this, but it's thousands to tens of thousands, like I said. This is what it looked like from March 2015 to for about the next year, April 2016, which is just a few months before the acquisition closed. So anybody who's run a SaaS app in a highly competitive space where you're fast growing and you basically need to hire bodies as soon as you have the revenue in order not to get killed by the competition, or you could slow growth. But anyone who's been in that situation knows that as soon as you have 5 or 10K, you hire another body. And as soon as you have 5 or 10K, you hire that next body just to keep up. Especially if you're scaling an app that requires a lot of queuing, a lot of technology-intensive stuff where the database is falling over every 4 months and you have to redeploy it, and the Amazon instances go from $1,500 to $3,000 to $6,000 a month just to keep the service going. And that's what this curve means. That's why even after hitting profitability, you can see November and February, we're basically breaking even when the line hits the 0 at the bottom. So the line, the x-axis, is a 0. I'm not here to say SaaS apps don't make money, because SaaS apps mint money, right? I mean, if you hit a place where you don't have a ton of competition like we do, you hit a place where you have a hit tail, you hit a place where maybe your growth is a little slower, or even you just have a different scenario than this. You don't have 500 people, 500 other companies coming after you. In our situation, it was this is what it looked like. This is as well as I know how to manage a company and build a product and you market, and this was it. So again, we could have slowed growth and just said, we're just going to grow slower and not hire these people. But it was not something that we were looking to do. We were looking to keep taking market share. And the thing I learned from this, of course, is something we all probably know, but maybe don't. We know it intrinsically, but maybe haven't said it out loud, is that fast-growing companies are very, very rarely profitable. And so while fast-growing sounds great, it is something where you have to ask yourself, how long am I willing to forego profit for growth? It's just a gut check. Your answer may be, if I was 25 years old and I had fire in my belly, maybe I'd be willing to do it for 10 or 20 years. I'm going to be 43 this year, and I've done a lot of these. And at a certain point, you look around and you think to yourself, I'm all in on this. I am all in. I am 43 years in. I'm 15 years of an entrepreneurial career, or I guess maybe that's only 11 or 12. But everything I have is here. If this company goes under, if something happens and it explodes, if we can't keep up, if a competitor kills us, I am going back to consulting. I mean, I don't know if I would have done that, but can you imagine me like coding, hey, can I get a job? I'd be coming to MicroConf being like, anybody hire me for C#, guys, I'm really good. It was scary. And I thought about this a lot, and I reflected. And again, remember, Derek and I were making all these decisions and stuff, so this is not necessarily his experience, but this was mine. I go back to this quote from Rand Fishkin, who is the CEO of SEO Moz, which is a oft admired SaaS company. And they, they were fast growing. They raised a round of funding around this time. And there was a whole thread online. This is 5 years ago, maybe. It was well before Drip. And he says, at the time we raised buckets of money. I think they raised 10 or 20 million, I don't remember. He says, I had personally as a CEO, $25K in a checking account. I had no car, and I had a rented apartment in walking distance to my office. And at this point, they were doing $1 million a month, more than $1 million a month. And there was a whole conversation about, he was like, isn't it supposed to be different? Like, when I watch The Social Network, this is not what happens. What's amazing is, so I did a part of like some of this talk in Europe. Since then, since our acquisition, this happened in November. This is like 4 months ago. You can't read it at all. I'm going to hop down and read it. So this guy named Will Reynolds, I don't know who he is, he tweets, he says, beware of the illusion of success. Most people you look up to are more invested in looking successful than being successful. And Rand Fishkin tweets back to him, I love Rand for this. He is so honest. Every time you hear him, he's transparent, not for the bullshit transparency, I want to market my company. He's transparent because that's who he is. He replies and he says, I just want one win, just one. And Will replies, does a win for you require an exit or going public? And Rand says, an exit of any kind, sale, IPO, private equity buyout, etc. I want to go from aspiring entrepreneur to successful entrepreneur. Now, I don't agree with Rand's definition that you have to have an exit or an IPO to be a successful entrepreneur. But what I do see in Rand is that it sounds like he's fucking burned out. It sounds like he is just taking punches in the gut. He's been running this business for over 10 years, as far as I know. And to him, I don't know if he still has $25K in his bank account, but I would sure feel like shit if that were my situation. And I had watched this evolve over time, and so in mid-2015, my personal state of affairs is, we've reached profitability for some months. Do I have freedom? And the answer was no. We were hustling. We were busting our asses on this business. I was thinking of it along with Derek day and night. Do I have purpose? I did, because the purpose was to grow the business, and I actually really loved that, and talking to people at MicroConf, getting new customers, all that stuff. Did I have really healthy relationships? No, because I was thinking about my business all the time. And did I have stability? I mean, I had a growing SaaS business, but it isn't the 20-year stability. I kept thinking, am I going to be doing this when I'm even 50, right? I'm 42 at the time. Am I going to be doing this when I'm 50? That's only 8 years out. And it was like, I don't know if I have another 8 years of this pace. It might just kill me. So Derek and I were talking like, all right, what are we doing? We're growing fast. We can keep doing this. We're going to slow growth. We started talking about funding. Are we going to let's raise a small round, do a 250 or 500K? Is that going to fix our stuff? How long will it fix it? And so we evaluated that and we talked it through. And there are pros and cons, especially in our shoes at the time, right? It would definitely have cut down on the monetary stress within the business, because I was hadn't paid myself back for all the money that I'd pulled out. And I felt like just never having to put money in again and being able to take investor money would have been easier. Which is almost never the case if you ask someone who's done it. But it was going to delay profitability for years, right? Because if you take the money, then you're taking it at a pretty hefty valuation. We weren't going to value the company at $2 million or something when we're doing 7 figures in revenue. So we're going to take this hefty valuation, and now we're in it for 3, 5, 7 more years. And I feel like by this time, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it for 7 more years. I don't know that I can commit to that. So during this, we were evaluating this constantly, every week, every 2 weeks. I'm like, Derek, what do you think about this? What do you think about raising money? I talked to Anna about it. What would this look like? And during this time, 2015, is when acquisitions started coming in. So we had a lot of offers of differing types, right? So I got 2 to 3, maybe 4 emails a month with funding offers. A lot of you in here do that. If you're on anybody's radar, you get the junior junior person at a VC fund. They're just doing lead gen and stuff. Some of them were more serious than others, I will say. I won't go into details, but it would have been pretty easy to raise a round. I don't see that being a problem. The more interesting thing was we had 5 potential acquirers inbound contact us who all have, actually 4 of them had the money to acquire us at a multiple that made sense, like a startup multiple, not some garage sale. And that was interesting only in the sense that I really was not we didn't build Drip to sell it. It wasn't on the radar before that. But as we started getting this inbound interest, it was like, so what is the choice here? We could sell, we could raise this funding, we could keep doing what we're doing, maybe slow it down, could grow out of revenue. Then one email came through. This is one of the 5, actually. And it was one that was perhaps the most interesting. So it's from Clay Collins, and he says, love Drip, interested in selling it. Would you ever consider selling Drip? I really like it. And of course, my answer was in my head, like, no, really not interested, right? And then I gave it a little more thought and realized, under what circumstances would I sell it? Reframed the question. Does everyone have a number, as Natalie said? Does everyone have a number? And it's not just a number, right? There are terms, there are deal breakers. So I started making lists, and the nice part is I took 6 months. I had retreats, I had all this stuff, and I just kept making lists of what would it look like? What are my absolute deal breakers that I will not sell for, and what are the deal breakers that if someone delivered all this stuff that it would work. Again, Derek's list was probably different. We merged them in the end, but this is just, I'm speaking for myself. So I realized that perhaps for me, Stability 4.0 was sunset money is what I'm calling it. So some people call it fuck you money, but that's just not my style. So I don't know, it's just aggressive and I'm not gonna tell anyone to fuck you. But I came up with sunset money when someone asked, someone on a podcast, they said, you sold your company, it wasn't me, they said, you sold your company, do you have enough money to just ride off into the sunset? And the guy said, yeah, I did. And I thought, that's a better way to say it, like sunset money. So I realized, maybe that would make sense. If I could do it and never have to work again, I don't know. I'd think about it if the terms are right. And so, again, as you look back at all these things that I parlayed, so I start, again, working class family, I made $17 an hour at my first job out of college. And then I programmed, I learned to code and $60 an hour as a developer, and then just bought .NET Invoice, bought the others, bought HitTail, and then those are gone. Take all the money from HitTail, put it into Drip, and in, 2 years by this time, this is Datanyze, and we're 10th on that list, right, of market share of marketing automation. And we were 4 people in a damn closet in Fresno, and it's HubSpot, and it's Marketo, and it's Pardot, and it's, look above us, Eloqua, ActiveCampaign, and the SharpSpring, and then it's Drip. And it's like, who are these freaking clowns? Like, these guys even know what they're doing? And so it was really like, we had built something pretty special with a very small team. And so it wasn't exactly something I wanted to be like, yay, if they can offer us, $1 million, we're gonna sell, or if they can offer me enough sunset money, I'm gonna be done. Because I viewed Drip as a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me. I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna happen twice for most people, unless your name is Jason Cohen or Heaton Shaw, but my name's not either of those. So there are always objections to selling, and this is what I started thinking through is, why shouldn't I sell? Why should I sell? Objections to selling that you will hear, especially in maybe our community of bootstrappers, but maybe even for any startup founder, is, my startup is my baby, I can't sell it. And I always think of this like, yeah, that's a negotiating tactic. Like, your startup's not your baby, guys. We all have kids, and trust me, even if they're my kids, you like them more than your startup. I've never felt this way, right? I've had a lot of different apps, and so this wasn't necessarily a deal breaker for me. I've heard this one interesting. We talked about this at dinner last night. Selling is selling out. And this is always said by someone who's never built a business that's worth selling. I've never heard a founder at MicroConf tell me that selling is selling out. It's always some guy, when Mojang sold for $1 billion, right, the Minecraft thing, Notch, this programmer who built this thing, I was just like, mad props, dude, $1 billion, that's insane. And we were at some dinner that night, and like a friend of ours, again, who had never been an entrepreneur, he's like, Notch sold out. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, what does that mean? Come on, the guy busted his ass for years. Like, so I just don't buy this. I think this is bullshit. What else would I do is another one I've heard. Well, if I sold my company, what else would I do? I hope you have an answer to this, because if you don't have anything else but your company, then you might need to get some consulting from a really good trained psychologist like my wife. No, I mean, you need to have hobbies. Like, what else would I do? Just off the top of my head, this is not your list, but my list is, well, I'm going to run 3 conferences a year, probably write another book. I'm going to do 2 podcasts. Maybe I'll start a 3rd. Maybe I'd travel a little more. Maybe I'll spend more time with my family and kids. That's what else I would do. So the what else would I do thing, I've always thought, like, that sounds like an excuse. So those are the why not to sells. Reasons to sell now, this is the interesting part. We all think, we hear about, Zuckerberg coming in and buying Instagram in a weekend. That never happens, ever, except for that one time. You like that? Never, ever, except for the one time. But the thing is that you will hear countless tales. If you poke into it and actually look at sales, you'll hear a lot of people that ride their company over the top for one reason or another. You'll ride it and it's growing, man. Woo, we're just on over. And then something happens, and it may be you lose your CTO. Maybe you have a big outage and you lose people. Maybe you hit that plateau, because we all hit a plateau where churn meets your acquisition, and eventually, once you hit the plateau, you're not worth nearly as much. I'm talking multiples less. And it may even move from where you're talking revenue multiples down to like net profit multiples, which is a 10x or a 30x discount. It's insane. So while you're growing and while you have inbound interest, that's the other thing. So let's say we hadn't sold Drip, and then right now I'm totally burning out, and I'm want to sell it, and we then go into the market to sell it. That's not good, because then you're trying to sell something and you're not going to be talking revenue multiple anymore. You're going to be talking net profit multiple. It's just such a different orders of magnitude. So this is where the startups are bought, not sold thing comes from. You've probably heard this before. When you have inbound interest, there is a school of thought that says strike while the iron is hot, because that inbound interest is not going to be there forever. You're not going to be as hot in a hot market as you are, because marketing automation was a hot thing. It still is, but there's only so many years that's going to happen. It's not going to last for a decade where everybody wants to buy marketing automation. So it's hard to look at, if you get inbound interest, it's hard to just say no, I think. I have heard regrets. So as we were going through the process, I talked to several founders, some of whom sold and some of who didn't. The ones who didn't sell, most of them regretted not selling when they did, because if they sold later, then they had a lower multiple. The other thing is this is the really counterintuitive one. The best time to sell is when you don't need to sell, when you're going fast, when everything's going up and to the right, because once you plateau, then you're worth less. So this is the best quote here on this topic. Once again, Jason Cohen bringing the thunder even when he's not here. So he wrote a blog post about him selling his company. It's called Rich or King. And he says, see, it's good to be king. King is when you run your company forever. It's a DHH thing, right, or Joel Spolsky. It's good to be king. But what do you do when you're at Trudy's North Star Tex-Mex restaurant tucking into a chili relleno, and the guy across the table looks you in the eye and offers you enough money that you never have to work again? Shit gets real. It's interesting to talk about it in the theoretical and to say selling is selling out. But what do you do when someone looks you in the eye and said, your kid's college paid for, and if you want to give, if given the choice, you never have to work again? And that number, by the way, for different people is totally different, right? Some people in this room might need 10 million and never have to work again. Other people, maybe it's 1 or 2. But there's, maybe it's 100 for some folks. But it's really fascinating to think about this. So this was the process and the thought. And my reply back to the story, Clay Collins emailed June 2015, and he says, I'd like to buy it. Would you be willing to sell it? And my reply was, after consulting with Derek, of course, I'm flattered that you would consider acquiring Drip. Drip is growing quickly and we're profitable, so selling now would need to make a lot of sense for me. And you were here a couple years ago, so you probably remember how that feels. And I went from there. I'll continue the story there. I realized during this time, as I said, I came up with my deal breakers on retreats and other things. And I had 4 deal breakers. One is that since I did genuinely see this as my last one, it had to be sunset money, because I wasn't going to do this again. So I had to be able to, given my current assets and whatever else is going on. I had to be able to kind of compile all this and feel comfortable, given math and retirement, that, yeah, I don't need to work anymore, you know? I did not want anyone to lose their job. The team is just too precious to me. It still is. I didn't want to screw our customers, meaning I didn't want the roadmap to go in some weird direction. I didn't want the product to get shut down, as a lot of startups do. And I had to keep doing what I do, right? This is the teaching. So I wanted to keep doing podcasts and MicroConf and such. And so turns out there was one acquirer that was really on board with this and in fact suggested some of these before I even did. And that was the cool part. And of course that was Lead Pages, you know, the end of this. So this is what acquisition activity, this is when we dive into like what this actually looked like from inside. This is what the activity looked like for about a year, from his first email all the way to the day it closed. And this is the number approximately of back and forths via email or I think Voxer. I think those are the two. And so you can see Clay made first contact in June of 2015. He sent that email. I replied with the reply you saw, and we kind of went back and forth. And then things kind of drifted. That's actually when they raised their round. They raised I think it was a $28 million B round, and it was to acquire companies. It was right in that month. And so I was like, oh, cool. They're actually serious about this. And then things just kind of, you can see July, August, September, almost zero contact. I don't know, I can't speak for what was going on there. I don't know if they were busy, or I don't know if my reply scared them off, right? My reply was kind of like, needs to be worth my while. It was a negotiating thing. I mean, I think there was a lot of that coming from both sides, as there will be in a deal of this size. I think once someone makes contact with you, every interaction from then on is part of a negotiation. A friend of mine advised me on that, and I thought I wouldn't have thought of that. It was pretty clever. So in October, someone got back in touch with me again. And that was when they really asked for like, what did the numbers really look like? Because I think I had just given them blanket MRR, but they wanted churn, they wanted like numbers and like my churn grid, all that stuff. So that was when it was like, I don't necessarily know, like, should we sign an NDA? I don't know what the standard is. And that's when I talked to Thomas at FE International. I'm actually doing QA with him tomorrow, Q&A up here tomorrow, about buying and selling businesses. But they are definitely better at this stuff than we are, right? We will do in our lifetime, right, each of us max one or two of these, whereas a company like FE or whoever else you were to find to represent you, they're going to do hundreds. And the person on the other side of the deal is going to be doing hundreds typically. They have someone, a big company doesn't just hire Joe Blow, founder, to do something. They actually have experts if they're going to spend a lot of money on a company. So that was when I did that, and then we went back and forth, and then stuff just kind of trailed off December and January. We launched Workflows, which is our visual builder. We launched that at the end of January. And that's when we really started getting into stuff. And it got really stressful. It was at the beginning of the year. And that's when, you see a number on a piece of paper and you're like, Derek and I walked out into a parking lot because we couldn't tell the team, that we were like, even considering this, because you don't want to derail everybody, and you feel guilty because you're keeping a secret from them. But Derek and I walked out in the parking lot, and I'm like shaking. I'm like, I can't even, it just got real, man. There's like a number on that thing that there's a lot of zeros. And so this was a negotiation back and forth. We couldn't agree on a price, and then we reconnected. So this is it. I'm showing you this. It feels tedious, right? Just on this slide. This was a fucking year of my life. I mean, it was, talk about tedious, and a year of my family's life too. Talk to Sherry about it later on. So then we agreed on a price eventually. We signed a letter of intent, got lawyers involved, and it was about a month or two later that we closed, July 1 of 2016. Incidentally, I'll talk about this a little later, but we started telling the team like 2 weeks before it closed, and I think that was absolutely the right decision, because you just can't distract your team. It's so distracting to be going through this. All right. Last section's coming up. We got to finish this one off, though.
You're in a concrete room with a table and a mirror. How do you get out?
I don't know. How do I get out?
You look into the mirror. You see what you saw. You grab the saw. You saw the table in half. 2 halves make a hole. You climb out the hole. This guy's got swagger.
All right. So last section here. So reflections on this, and what's cool is I gave a good chunk of this talk in Europe, but I was like, I would think we were 60 days, past the acquisition, 9 months now. So I really have a lot, some thoughts and reflections. So July 1, of 2016. Yes, we were acquired, and we made it public, I think, a week later, because you just got to write press releases and all this stuff, and they announced it. Now, you probably were thinking, July 1 of 2016, this was me, right? Perhaps even this, both Derek and I. But indeed, I was with that same funny kid, I was at a Suzuki cello camp. And with Suzuki cello, you're supposed, or strings at all, you're supposed to be in with the child as the, as the instructor's doing stuff, and you're kind of working with them. And I like, bzzz, phone, and they look at me like, why is your phone supposed to be out there? And I'm like, I gotta sign documents, excuse me. And so I run out, and I'm feeling like so ashamed, And I'm like signing this deal size on my damn phone. And it was just the irony of it. I was just like, this is it though, but like relationships, right? Like I was there for the kid. The kid didn't know. So it was a fun time. It was a fun time. And that's when, Derek texted me with a screenshot of the bank account where I was like, whoa, all right. Here are a couple takeaways, and then I'll wrap up. If you go through this, it's going to take it takes a long time. You saw from that graph, that is absolutely typical from all the research I did. I listened to audiobooks on this. There's entire podcasts that just interview people who've had real acquisitions like this, not Instagram and TechCrunch and all that crap, but the people who really sell in our space for like a nice, like an actual acquisition. It's gonna take a long time. It's gonna take longer than you think, and absolutely longer than you want it to, period. So you have to, the one piece of advice I would give you is to run your business as if you are not being acquired. Because if we had suddenly stopped hiring, stopped spending money on ads, done anything different the day that Clay emailed me, we would have had a year of just, I don't know, slow growth. We would have imploded. You just can't do that. You don't know how long it's going to take. So right up until the last minute, it was like maybe 2 weeks before, I was still telling Sherry, I just don't know if this is going to go through. I don't know if this is going to go through. And she's like, we can't do that. We're like moving, dude. We're moving to Minneapolis. So this was a mistake people said that they made pretty commonly in these interviews with folks who had sold their businesses, that they started like trying to hoard cash or not hire or do weird things, and you just can't do it. We hired 2 people within 3 or 4 months before the acquisition closed, and it is what it is. It was a good decision. The last thing I talked about earlier is like, it is so distracting for everyone, but firewall them until the last possible days. And it's tough. And Derek or I, or both of us went and sat down with every member of our team. There were only 8 of us, so we were able to do that. Individually, we went and we said, I'm gonna tell you I'm gonna tell you something that's gonna sound like bad news at the start, but trust me, it's gonna be good for all of us. And then we went through it. And in the end, I actually, if you asked anyone on our team, I think they would agree that it was good for all of us in the end. There's a bunch of good stuff that happened that I don't have time to talk about, but in the end, the reasons it went through, at least for me, are that none of my deal breakers were ever even questioned or ever even, not on the table as terms. And when I think about it, does this give me freedom? Yes, absolutely. And even in the short term, it gives me freedom to not have to be worrying about the business so much. Do I still have the purpose of growing Drip? Yes, because Derek and I and the team everybody's still there, right? We all are still working on the app. Does it give me more time for relationships? Absolutely. And does it give me my stability 4.0? And yeah, it does. So what happened next? We were all given the choice of, move to Minneapolis or not. Minneapolis is a really cool city, so flash forward a couple months, and this was me walking to work in my Han Solo, almost frozen in carbonite outfit. It was 30 below that day, and that was a new experience for me. I'm in the lobby of Lead Pages. It's crazy. And then this is Sherry and our I think our 6-year-old, and she has a water bottle in her hand because it was so cold that day, the snow doesn't stick together. It was, let me say that again, so cold, snow doesn't stick together. Where do we live? So it was not like this all the time, but it was a shocker. So they're trying to build a snow fort, and she's spraying it with water. It was insane. And then I pulled my phone out to take a picture, and it promptly died because it was literally 20 below, and the phone, like the battery freezes up or something. So it's the Minnesota joke, I know. Minnesota's actually really cool. And then this is us in Cancun getting away from it. And this is 2 days ago, and Minneapolis is back to looking like this. This is 1 block from our house with Minneapolis in the back. So it's definitely been a good move for the family. Drip became Drip from Lead Pages, and we have a really good integration with them now. And I've personally, a lot of stuff's changed for the team in terms of more resources and stuff. Again, from my perspective, I've been able to hand off HR and legal, payroll, benefits. These are not things I personally enjoy. Most of operations, hiring support personnel, and more. Derek and I focus on the product a lot. We hire engineers. We've tripled our engineering team in the past 6 months, 9 months, I guess. And so far, it genuinely, a bunch of people have asked me before, today, like, does this feel like a win type thing? And so, yeah, it's kind of cool to be able to grow the product with resources of a funded company, but I didn't have to raise the funding. I've handed off most of the work I didn't enjoy, and I've achieved that stability. And I've genuinely, and I'm not just saying this, like I have not, there has not been a day since the acquisition closed that I've woken up and thought, man, I really wished I hadn't done that. It hasn't happened. And Derek and I were having beers 2 weeks ago, and I asked him out of the blue, have you ever had any regret? And he said, nope. So it feels good. You have a year to think about something, you agonize over it enough, I think you eventually probably make the choice that's right. So there's some potential drawbacks to selling. Obviously, there's a bunch. Leaving money on the table could be one, right? Because we're still growing. So yeah, if I sold now, we probably would have sold for more because you have more revenue. That's something you got to think about. Working for someone else could be a crappy one. We've actually had a pretty good transition in, and I've really enjoyed working for them. It's a good team, and they've left us relatively autonomous, which has helped a lot. And then obviously you could lose control of your product. This we didn't. We still own the roadmap in general. And obviously, if your identity is tied to your product, if it's the only thing you've ever built and it really is your baby, then maybe it'll be tough for you. So I want to leave you with one thought, and this is the thing. This was a question that I've thought about, and when I've posed this to other founders who have sold, they said, man, that helps me feel so clear about why I made that decision. The question is this. If you had the opportunity for a deal structure that works for you and sunset money, is it worth saying no for a chance at 2 times that amount? Or 3 times? Is it worth the risk? So that's a question. You may say yes, you may say no, but I think you know what my answer is. I'm out of time. Thank you so much for listening.
So Rob, have you bought anything ridiculous yet?
Oh, I've been asked that on a bunch of questions. Sherry knows what it is. So until about 3 months ago, the answer is no. And then I drive a beat up car, I just always have. But I like investing, so I've been investing in stocks and all this stuff, and a little bit of gold and Bitcoin and all that. But I realized that collectibles is a good way to diversify. And when I was a kid, I used to collect comic books, and I now have the money to buy some really expensive comic books. So I have, you get graded in this like slab, and they're all like collectible. So yeah, I've spent a lot of money in the past 4 months on, I own Amazing Spider-Man #1, Fantastic Four #1, Amazing Fantasy 15, keep going on. So yes, they're in a safe deposit box, but damn, that's been fun. I didn't realize it. I could give a crap about the Lamborghini, but this stack of comic books that I have it's so embarrassing. I pull them out, I look at the front, you can't read them because they're encased in this slab, and then I go, ooh yeah, this is all worth it. Freedom, purpose, relationships, and epic comic books.
Relationship with a comic book?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for that talk and the transparency. It was super insightful. How stable was the revenue? Meaning, if you had decided to milk it, to cut costs, fire everybody that you thought you could get away with, et cetera. Yeah, extreme, contract your values, et cetera.
Yeah.
How quickly do you think the revenue would have evaporated? And related to that, how could you have gotten anywhere close to that level of payout in profits just by milking it over an extended period of time? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I actually did the analysis, and I talked it through with Ruben one day on a call, Ruben from Basecamp. And we were doing loose math, but we did say exactly that. What if couldn't have been able to fire everybody, but let's say we had, I said, what if we just cut it down to a couple people and did exactly that? Because the revenue was definitely stable, right? I mean, it was just going up and to the right. It's SaaS. It eventually would have trailed off. But by our estimations, it was, and this is going to sound like it's in my favor, but after we did it, we were like, oh, that's pretty interesting. It was 10 years. 10 years to get the same amount of money, yeah. And that doesn't imply any multiple, right? But that's just, I'm saying, based on our calculations, it was going to take 10 years for there to be that much net profit as what we're going to get out of it. So, yes, sir.
So after this acquisition, how has the leadership changes occurred?
In Drip,
Yeah,
or-
in Drip. Are you like CEO and then you built a leadership team? Because I saw operations up on
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Like, how's that work now?
Yeah, so really we just came over as LeadPages already has 2 software products, and we just came in as a third business unit or department. And so we had a support person who merged in with LeadPages support, and they started a little Drip support pod. So I don't manage support, but we went from 1 to 7 full-time support people in 9 months, as an example. Operations really was just handed up to the corporate, if that makes sense. So I'm not a general manager, right? I don't want to run like a big organization, and that's part of the thing of being able to hand off these pieces around product. But then product, we're our own little department, so we've not merged engineering of Drip with, say, engineering of LeadPages, because we do things differently, right? They're a much maybe 40 engineers or something, and we're 8 right now. So you just have to have different processes. So it feels kind of like the best of both worlds so far. There's trade-offs. I had a really tough time giving up like the marketing side at the first start. Clay was like, we're going to redo the marketing side. And I'm like, no, but every line of copy, every video, it's my voice, But he was right, and I'm so happy to not be doing that anymore. It's funny the things you think you really want to do until they're not there. So, yeah.
Hey, Rob, could you tell us a little bit about the role FE played in advising you in this process?
Yeah, FE International, yeah. A big role, it was a big sanity check for me. There were a couple things. So they were essentially like an investment banker or a broker on my side, and they were able to tell me, I'd get these terms in this contract, and I'm like, so you're going to retain this much, and there's a percentage here, and it's like, is this normal, or is someone trying to take advantage of you? And so I would ask them, and they would say, yeah, that's standard, man. You can't, you're not going to negotiate out of that. Every deal is like that. And that was, or they would say, this one, this line here has negotiating room. So that was really the role. It was the sanity check. And then even a sanity check on when we were talking back and forth with LeadPages about, let's say, numbers or different terms. FE brought up like, maybe figure out, try to get as much as you can in writing by the time you hit the letter of intent, because once you sign a letter of intent, it's exclusive until it closes, unless you guys back out, right? So you really don't want to just agree on price by the time you get to an LOI. You want to agree on like price and terms, and there's typically like an earn-out where you have to work a certain amount of time, and salaries, and are the employees coming with you, and what are their salaries? I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and so they really front-loaded it, which felt uncomfortable, but I think was the right choice, because then by the time we really got into due diligence, it was kind of like, oh, most of this is decided. That was really a pain in the ass, but now we're here. So it was a good advisory position. Again, they have and will go through hundreds of acquisitions, and I'm gonna have just a couple, basically.
So my question goes back to where you were basically saying, I didn't really have freedom. I really didn't have, my relationships were suffering, and I didn't really have the stability that I wanted.
Yeah.
And I kind of identify with being in that place, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one. But I don't think an acquisition is really going to help me out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, are there other ways of achieving that? Or do you have advice for somebody who's in that position and trying to see their way past it so that they can regain some of that freedom and some of that stability and time for their relationships?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right, because this was just my path, right? I mean, this was not a framework or anything. It was kind of the road I traveled over these 11 or 12 years. I think, I don't know that I have an easy answer for that. I think that if I had something that was unacquirable or unsellable, I think that the relationship piece is the one that doesn't necessarily depend on an acquisition. I think it can be more of a state of mind, and that may be mean conversations with, a therapist, a consultant, a psychologist, somebody to kind of I would have loved to have been smacked around and been like, dude, here's what you need to do. You need to carve out time for your kids. You need to carve out time for your wife. You need to do this. I actually think that one I could have achieved. It was more of my mental. It was not a time thing, if that makes sense. That's probably the easiest one to fix, is to get somebody to smack you around a little bit, so to speak. The freedom one is a little tougher, right? Because if you really do need to work 10 or 12 hours a day in order to make the business run, I'm not sure, other than outsourcing, it's stuff we're hiring. Like, you asked the question to Natalie today about what if I can't afford to hire. So I'm not sure that that's gonna solve it. But I haven't thought about that a lot, to be honest. So I don't have a great answer, I think. Yes, sir.
Hey Rob.
Hi, John.
Question I've got is, what gave you the confidence to invest the money from HitTail into Drip? Was it a case of you had a gun to your head because HitTail was going down? Was it because you really wanted to see email marketing automation in the world? Was it because you had product market fit and you knew you just had to put more money in? What gave you the confidence to invest that money?
Yeah, I think it was. That's a really good question, by the way. It was a couple things. One, it was confidence in. I've had successes in the past. This Drip was not my first rodeo, and I felt like I had the skills to do it. I had built the skills to do it. Another is I knew that I had a network and an audience. I had a network of people I could go to say, hey, influencer, or hey, friend, like, I know you have an audience. I knew that I had the pieces to make it work, and I was fairly confident that would happen. Another thing was working with Derek. I just knew we build good software together, and I knew that it's not always the best product that wins, but I knew we could build a damn good product. That was it. And I wasn't 100% sure, but I felt like we were onto something, especially when folks, there were signposts along the way, right? Brandon Dunn was one of our very early customers, Ruben from BidSketch, Jeff from Ambassador. These are good product people. And they kept saying, this has something, but like, you just need one more thing. And they were different people. Drew Sanaki is another guy. And they kept saying, add automation. I think you could get there. And so as the automation started trickling and the revenue went up, I was like, oh, we're not getting there fast enough, but I think I can add more flames to this fire. So it was a balance of getting some positive signals back and also feeling finally, for maybe the first time, I felt confident enough in my own entrepreneurial ability. I probably should have felt that way years ago, but it took that long to build it in me.
Hey, Rob. I just got one of those emails recently, so this has been super relevant.
Cool.
How did you think about your personal freedom in any kind of acquisition offer for any kind of leader of a company? There's usually some amount of time where you're tied up at that company, and whether that made a difference to you or didn't. I was surprised that it wasn't on your list of 4 deal breakers.
Like,
so I was wondering how you
I want
thought about
0
that.
days. Yeah, I want to work for somebody else for 0 days type thing. Question was, how important was it? For me personally, I had listened and read and done enough research that I realized that there's only 2 startup acquisitions in kind of realistic space that I've ever heard of where the owner doesn't have to go with the company. So that was never even not really a question. I knew that I was going to have to go for some period of time. I also realized that I disliked working for companies in the past. I disliked my jobs because I often worked with people I didn't necessarily like or respect. I often didn't have the autonomy or the control. There were a bunch of reasons I didn't like it. It isn't that I hate working for anybody else. I'm not a complete sociopath. It's only half a sociopath. And so I started weighing that, and especially, you build a relationship, right? Clay Collins, he'd been on the podcast, we had talked, like I came out and met people, Derek and I flew out and met people at Lead Pages, and I'm like, it's kind of cool. I never worked at a startup. Like, they have the whole shebang, and it just felt like a creative environment that we could potentially thrive in, and we were going with our gut that I think this could work, And of course, there's negotiation around all of that. There's duration, and there's what that looks like, but that wasn't a deal breaker for me. Yeah, and I don't regret it. I don't feel 9 months in like I've just pissed away 9 months of my life. Like, I don't feel like that at all. I actually feel like I've learned a ton. Right? You work with. I consider Lead Pages, and I did before. I used to say this. Lead Pages, I think, is one of the best in the world at top of funnel marketing. Like, they're amazing SaaS marketers, and so I've been inside that engine for 9 months, like, tell me that's not kind of a cool tour, you know? I've also seen how they run development and with a big team, and I've just learned a ton about how I think from a much larger company, because they're 170, 180, and I've seen how a pretty efficient, well-funded startup at that scale works, and I've never been exposed to that, aside from, you know, Social Network or Silicon Valley or something. Yeah.
Hey Rob, so
Hey, Alvin.
I'm curious, how does your team reacted to that? Like, you know, were they nervous? You know, what kind of questions did they ask you?
Yeah, how did the team react was the question. Almost without fail, I said, I'm going to tell you something that is going to sound like bad news, but trust me, it's going to be good for us. Just follow me, you know, give me a few minutes to explain. Almost without fail, everyone was like, oh yeah, I'm in. And we even had, someone was like, are you moving? And I was like, I don't know. And on the spot, it was like, if you're moving, I'm moving. Like, we started getting that. We had a small team, and we were all very loyal to one another. Like, I would back them up when shit hit the fan in terms of customers or, you know, stuff coming. And I felt like they backed us up. You know, they backed me and Derek up. There was one person had been at 2 separate startups that had each been acquired over the past several years, and shit had just gone sideways. And so that was a different story. He's like, that's fine, but I'm sure stuff's gonna, you know, but it was what it was. He's like, I'll hang around and see what happens. And so we're 9 months, and of course he still works with us, you know, or he still works for us. So we definitely handled it with kid gloves though, right? We didn't get everybody in a room and make some big proclamation. This is what's happening. Here's your HR paperwork, people. I mean, it was a lot of time, and I don't regret, you know, spending that time to kind of help everybody, because it's a shock when you hear this, you know, to kind of help everybody get used to it.
We'll take one more question after this.
Yeah.
On an earlier slide, you shared startups are bought, and you also shared that you were approached multiple times.
Yep.
Did you leave some breadcrumbs or tea leaves? How did these companies, when you're a private company, how did they recognize that you were gaining market share? Were there studies showing the market leaders? Why were they coming to you?
Good point, or good question. One advantage we have is we had the widget with the powered by drip, and people started seeing it everywhere, right? The little UI pop up. Even without that, we were like I said, number 10 on Datanyze, and people look at that stuff. We got written up in places like VentureBeat, which is like a big VC-backed thing. They chose us. They did a big analysis of all these marketing automation. They chose us as the choice for small business, you know, thing. And it's like this unfunded upstart in Fresno, California. So once that happened, actually, we got a ton of like inbound funding interest. And I don't know if some of these people heard about it there, but you just kind of go, you know, SaaSter, Jason Lemkin, he says, when you hit, because we were doing 7 figures in revenue, right? That's no secret to anybody. He said when you hit about 1.5 million in ARR, you develop what's called a mini brand. And you're not a brand like GE yet, but everyone kind of has heard of you. You know, you're big enough, at least in that space, that the people at least know who you are. And when they hear, so acquirers like people who haven't raised funding because they don't have to deal with investors, and they know that the price is probably going to be less than if you'd raised a bucket of money. So if they do then hear that you're bootstrapped, it's actually your better target, you know. And not a target in a bad way, but a good acquisition potentially. Last one, sir.
If you couldn't have found anyone who would have honored all of your deal breakers and you didn't get an acquisition in this period, would that have been fine? Or were you at a point where you really wanted to get out?
Nope. I was, for all that I portrayed there, like 2014 was really hard. We were genuinely past that. We may have raised that small round because cash was constraining our growth. Lack of cash was constraining it. But yeah, I actually don't think I would have imploded. I don't think, certainly the team wouldn't have imploded. Like, yeah, no, we'd still be running the business. It was profitable, it was growing. Everything I told Clay was true. But it's just, you know, the things all met. The stars aligned, as they say.
Thank you very much, Rob.